Is this us? Do you think we're into it, team?
Yeah, I think we're into it. That's it.
I think this must be us. Okay, very good. Welcome, everybody. We're really happy to be here. It's a strange and wonderful time at the moment, but really happy to be here with Aaron and I, with Nicole and Tim, ready to have a little bit of a chat with you. Before we get underway, we just want to talk a little bit about why we're here, before we ask Aaron and then Nicole and Tim what's in this conversation for them. I thought we better just recap a little bit about how we got here. So my name's Nick, by the way. G'day. Yeah, really, when we started out, what are we as Pinot Noir growers in the maybe late 70s if we're lucky, but really early 80s, 90s, most of the plantings went in 90, 2000s. You know, we started out pretty confident. I think even by 2001, we had our first event, international event, getting people down and saying, hey, check us out. We're doing really well. By the end of in about another 10, 15 years, we were kind of already deciding to backslap each other and go, hey, we're actually really good at this, and maybe a little bit too premature, not sure, but by 2017, we sort of really started to think about who are we and why are we doing this, and trying to look at our own identity a little bit more carefully. And we really wanted to carry on that theme with the whole bunch this year, earlier in the year. An event that was, it was actually Pinot Noir 2021 at the start, just trying to carry on that and delve a little bit deeper into our identity as New Zealanders. And then the whole bunch came along because of, what happened with COVID and just trying to make it a little bit more intimate. And we realized that we wanted to do the work at home and on the land before we went out and re-engaged with the rest of the world again. And that was the idea behind the whole bunch and what we were trying to do. But of course, that was scuppered as well by this last outbreak. And we could have just shut it down until February, which is when we're going to have it in the end. But we said, why not just get the conversation going? We've got these amazing speakers, these lovely people that are tuning in and are interested in what we're doing. So let's just get them in and use technology as we're doing right now, just to start out and have the conversation, start the conversation now. So by the time February rolls around, we're already that far further ahead, and by the time we can actually have an event where we can all come together internationally as well, we're so much further ahead in terms of how we're relating to our land and our people. In terms of that's how we got here, but just with the help of New Zealand wine growers, obviously they've been on board since the start. The bunch, our team, have been working on this for 3 years. Penn Nash and Helen Masters have been fearlessly cheering it up, and now we also need to be grateful for the tech that's allowing us to come together here. So that's kind of why we're here, and I'm going to just hand over to Aaron and say, hey, g'day, Aaron. What's in this conversation for you?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. It's I guess we all come to these discussions from different perspectives, and for me, I was really interested in the cultural relationship to fine wine, and what I mean by that is if I look at the the New Zealand industry and where we've been going, we've got 10 years of absolutely amazing growth as an industry, but then if you go a layer below that, Sauvignon Blanc has been growing at just over 60% in the last decade. So it's grown 61% over the last 10 years in export receipts. Pinot Noir at that point has only grown by 2.9% over that 10 years. And so that to me is a really interesting notion that, one is going like this and the other is pretty much flatline. And it's obviously not something that we're happy about, but, they're selling into 2 different channels, and at 2 different price points, different consumers. But if I look at Pinot, where we are today versus where we were 10 years ago, quality has improved. I think vine age, maturity as winemakers, we feel like we're doing better, but yet that story's not really resonating, mustn't be resonating to a certain extent with the buyers and the consumers. And so what are the other things, what are the other layers that those buyers and consumers are looking to us for, you know, what is it that they want in terms of our story. And when I mean story, I'm not talking about some thin marketing veneer, you know, some narrative that we're telling. Like, is there, you know, something in our value system, our culture, our beliefs that could really resonate with our partners overseas and our consumers? And so that's, to me, that's a really interesting notion. And I think there's two elements there. There's an ambition as Pinot Noir producers. What is our ambition? And then there's a cultural element, and the two can be a little bit interlinked in the sense that Kiwis by nature quite humble, and we don't walk around saying we want to be as good as Burgundy. But maybe there's something there that we should be saying, you know, in 10, 20, 50 years time, that we want to sit alongside Burgundy as the great Pinot Noir producing nation. And I think, you know, there's probably a discussion there. And then there's the other cultural elements, and I sort of reference culture. Matt Kramer in 2016 at the Sauvignon Blanc conference he was one of the keynote speakers, and he was saying that Sauvignon Blanc doesn't have culture, but it needs it if it's going to get the price point that it requires to be sustainable, I guess. But he was saying Pinot Noir does, and I think he's kind of right. The stronger the story, the stronger your culture, then there's an economic value to that. But when he's talking about Pinot Noir, he's talking about Burgundy in so many respects, and not our culture. And I don't think, Nick, I think this is more your forte, but we can't out Burgundy. And so where I'm really interested in is what are our cultural advantages, and I think we have environmental advantages and environmental opportunities, and I think we have amazing bicultural advantages and opportunities. If I look at the other nations that produce Pinot Noir, we've got some wonderful advantages there if we're brave enough to, or maybe to explore and to embrace, and maybe that will help our story resonate a little bit stronger with those buyers. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and yeah, I'm be fascinated with this discussion and the opportunity to talk to you guys about some of those elements. But Nick, I reckon you're probably coming from a slightly different perspective, probably less commercial. Tell us about your interest.
Yeah, I'm desperate to hear from Nicole and Tim, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from, because I'm on a Swiss ball, by the way. That there is that I think it hopefully speaks to some of the people out there that have been on this path in New Zealand for a little while. You know, thank you, Aaron. We're not just trendy lefties having this conversation. There is a commercial element to it as well. But from me, it's really I'm a Pinot Noir grower from New Zealand. I'm here having this conversation. I'm trying to listen and learn and share. I've got a patch of dirt. I'm in a privileged situation to be on a beautiful patch of dirt with my family and my team. We happen to be on a place that grows Pinot Noir seemingly relatively well. Again, another privilege. I'm a student, like many of all of the producers here in New Zealand that are Pinot Noir producers. We're a student of Burgundy. Last time we're going to use the word, but it's like, you know, everything that we've done, whether it was from the vineyard, the variety, the way our culture, our approach to the language, using the notions of terroir, single blocks, the way we pick, the way that we process our fermentation vessels, our maturation vessels, our barrels, our oak, our time in that, the time and bottle, the shape of the bottle, the label hierarchy, everything that we've done really is a borrowed culture, and we do that well as Kiwis. I think we've done that really well in lots of different facets. But it's like, after all of that, after studying that for many years, like all of us, I think we came back and we started producing, and now we're in this stage of like, you know, where do we get what's our cultural reference point now to grow as individuals and as New Zealand itself? And I think when we look at that, we find that we're a lot more culturally mature here in New Zealand than we thought that we were, perhaps, when we started out on the path. In fact, Anne Salmon says that, you know, hopefully she's going to be join us before Christmas, but if you're out there, Anne, please do. She's going to be one of our speakers at Whole Bunch, and she says, you know, Pacifica, by the time our ancestors as Pākehā got here, Pacifica, you know, a third of the area of the world was already a part of our story of New Zealanders. And I know, Tim, you talk about this in terms of New World versus Old World. I'd love to get into that space as well. But, you know, all of the shared values that we have as Pinot Noir growers sit here in an Indigenous framework, not all of them, but many of them, that we'd love to be part of and love to call not our own. We can't take sovereignty over that language, but actually just at least share in those values. But we have to, before we do that, we have to go acknowledge what has come before us, and that, you know, we have to look at ourselves as what sort of partners we've been and what sort of partners we can be in this country. And so we've got a lot of ground to make up there. And so in that journey that I'm personally just starting out on, and a lot of our my friends and colleagues in Pinot Noir and elsewhere as well are starting out on the path, we find ourselves in the presence of people like Nicole. Thank you for joining us. Like, you know, in your own words, you're like a Tuahiwi Pā kid, but you're, you know, in my words, you're a massively experienced and wise director and position strategist. And, you know, what's in this conversation for you? Where do you see the value in this conversation?
O ngā mihi, Nick, e mihi ana kia ki ngā waina o Aotearoa, kai waina o Aotearoa, he urio no te iwi ngaitahu, no Tuahiwi ahau, ko Nicole Manawa tū, Brendan tōku ingoa. Well, I guess for me, and that's just me telling you that I'm from Tuahiwi, which is a little place in North Canterbury, so around about 18 kilometres out of Christchurch. So I grew up in a rural setting and not far from Waimarae, and grew up very involved and active on Waimarae as well. The conversation that I'm going to be talking about is whanaungatanga, and, you know, it's all about forming and maintaining relationships. And whanaungatanga has so many different branches to it as a word, and of actually what it means. I mean, when you break that down, whānau is family, whanaunga is relative, whanaungatanga means relationship, and whakawhanaungatanga is the process of establishing that relationship. And so when you're breaking down a word and having a look at all the parts of what it is, and when it comes together to be one, you have to ask yourself, actually, in what way do you do that? And what I'm hoping from this conversation is to really share about how important that has been, I guess, in defining who I am in my professional and my personal life, and looking at how we establish those relationships and what they mean, and for sharing with other people about having an attitude of what whanaungatanga means. And we often hear people talk about all of the different values that we have as Māori: whanaungatanga, manaakitanga, ukaipuatanga, all of the tangas. And I would like for us to get out of this being able to understand that having an attitude is really, really awesome, but it's actually not enough. You need to be able to progress that attitude into practice. And what does it look like in practice? And quite often people will be able to go, oh yeah, no, I love the Māori values, and I love the value of whanaungatanga, and I think it's really great, and this, you know, and we want to do this. And then they need to be able to take that attitude and actually put it into practice. So what does that look like for you? What does that look like when you practice it? And are you able to articulate that to be able to say what that looks like when you actually practice it? So today the conversation for me is about getting out of this, being able to share with other people some tools and some techniques, I suppose, about moving from attitude to practice with whanaungatanga, and also just, you know, not being intimidated by it either. When we use words such as, when we use Māori words, that actually, you know what that is. It's just that the moment that you hear something like whanaungatanga or manaakitanga, you automatically go, I don't want to offend someone, I'm not sure what that is. And my role here is to break that barrier down and go to you, yeah, push into it, lean into it, get it wrong, because you're not going to learn if you don't. And once you understand the value of whanaungatanga and knowing who you are yourself, you're going to understand us a heck of a lot better. And we're going to actually be able to practice true relationships and true partnerships and what they're meant to be. And by having a look at Tim's bio, it looks like he's going to be able to even expand further and delve into more of what that interconnectedness is, and other ways of doing that. So kia ora, Tim.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's the one that that I really want to get back to as well, is that importance of understanding where you come from. You know, telling your story, even the bad bits. You know, don't varnish over stuff. Actually go back and understand it and tell it direct. But Tim, you like what? You're like a bloke, a guy who grew up in the burbs of Melbourne. You're obviously an amazing author. You've written numerous books that have been, you know, really touched people, and sadly not fast enough because they seem to be written so far ahead of their time. You were on the Australian Climate Council as well, I understand, and you know, at least one mammal's named after you.
Yeah.
What are you doing? What's this conversation for you?
Well, thanks so much, Nick. I should introduce myself just before I go there. And so I'm calling you from Darug country, which is Aboriginal land just on the northern outskirts of Sydney, in an area which is mostly national park. And it's kind of a spiritual home, really, for me. My ancestors all came from Europe in the 19th century, settled in Melbourne. My great-grandfather was a Norwegian sea captain. He set up a ship's chandling business. And my grandfather ran away to sea at the age of 12, and he went to New Zealand. He went to Dunedin to work. So if he'd stayed there, I could have been a Kiwi, I guess. But he came back to Melbourne and set up a family there. And so here I am in Australia. But the links, you know, across the Southern Hemisphere are pretty strong, I think, particularly between Australia and New Zealand. It's not just rugby, it's a whole lot of stuff. We learn from you guys every day in the biological sciences. We see how you deal with your environmental management in a way, in many cases, which is a leadership position for us. We get to see you know, really, really great innovation. I think a lot of that innovation comes from the bicultural nature of the way you approach things. We don't have that as well developed in Australia. Of course, we don't just have two cultures. We have, you know, 300 Aboriginal cultures and Torres Strait cultures, and so for us, it's been a longer learning process, I think, and a more difficult path. But we do look to you, and I say that not just to make you feel good, but it's actually true. That's what we see from this perspective in Australia. So my life has really been, I suppose, one of learning. I've worked extensively with Indigenous communities in Australia, but even more extensively with Indigenous communities in the Pacific. So most of my research life has been spent in Eastern Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji, that area. So, and I find that, you know, if you learn at the feet of the great masters, the people who understand the ecology, the old men and women of those cultures, it's an incredible gift. You know, I did a PhD at a university. What I learned in that PhD was really pretty trivial compared with what I've learned in the field subsequently with those people. And I guess my reason for wanting to engage with you, Nick and Aaron, and the rest of the wine growers in New Zealand is that I find what you're doing incredibly exciting. You know, if you take a longer view of it, you're at the start of a fabulous journey, really, of fitting people to land, and to some extent land to people. You know, you've got the great advantage of having that Maori, what would I say, prior learning and knowledge of the land. But you're trying to do something which is incredibly ambitious and very meaningful. It's not just about selling more wine or better wine, as good as that is, that would be great, but it's fitting people to land. And as an ecologist and someone who is, I mean, that's how I think about the whole of this great Australasian enterprise, really. How do we fit people to the land? So I'm here to learn as much as I can from you guys, but also to offer some experience, perhaps, of that broader ecological perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. And definitely would like to delve into the sort of science and where the interconnectedness of between science and Indigenous knowledge comes. But firstly, Nicole, when you talk about whanaungatanga, I think when we talked about it previously, you were saying that the power rests within hapu, within the family, rather than perhaps within iwi, in terms of your identity and where your power lies. Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that the kind of, I guess, the colonised view of what has happened for Māori is that iwi have become the power of hierarchy, and actually it's not the way in which our culture works. Whānau, it's actually an upside down sort of way of looking at it. So whānau actually hold the power. Whānau make up what we call hapu, sub-tribes. So then you have sub-tribes, and then the sub-tribes make up the iwi. I guess in a European thinking way, the reason that iwi have become, I guess, what are considered the powerhouses is because they have attached to them commercial entities. And so the way in which we see those type of things, and if we were to look at it from a commercial structure, is that we see companies, and then we see subsidiary companies that sit underneath that, and that's the way we look at it. And often the shareholders sit to the side. But for us as Māori, we get to actually we're active, and that we get to be able to go to our hapu when we vote. We go as whānau, we go there, we vote on decisions that are really, really important. And then we have people that sit around this table that make up our iwi, and they go there and they talk about the things that concern us, and decide whether or not as a whole that's something that we want to tackle as an iwi. But the power's always sat with the people, and I think it's no different to the democratic society that we have here in New Zealand. But sometimes I think we forget that, and we tend to just go with the status quo, and we become followers, and we lose sight of actually what it is that's important to us. And so we believe that we can't make a change, and we don't. That's not the case for Māori, and one of the great things about that is Māori have what we call a tūranga waiwai, and that means it's kind of what Tim was talking about, like how do we fit people to the land. And for us, the most important thing when we introduce ourselves in a setting such as this is the first thing that we actually do is that we introduce ourselves by being able to connect ourselves back to our whenua, back to our land. Because that's what gives us a strong sense of belonging and a sense of self. And if we can't do that, then we don't have ukaiportanga. We're not nurtured by anything in particular. So being able to whakapapa ourselves back, and being able to have that kōrero, and being able to say I'm from here and this is my whenua, you know, that's what gives us that strong sense of self, that strong sense of belonging, and why we have such strong values. So I'm not sure if that answers the question. But
I had to give you a you didn't really know what te awa was when we talked about it, and I love this idea of that. This whole conversation is, I mean, where we're going needs to be about sharing, and it's not just about learning or adapting or emulating. It's actually something that we can actually say, well, this is something we've learned. Let's get it. Let's pair those up. Te awa versus tūranga waiwai. It sounds like te awa is like a plant tissue version of a human tissue. Tūranga waiwai, how human tissue and culture is affected by place. And so I thought that when you, I don't know, like when you're talking about the power and the, I guess, cultural strength of a place, it's like the health of a vineyard. And when we start talking about our own, what we're trying to do with the whole bunch, what this whole exercise has been about from the beginning, is like looking at our own identity as individual wine growers and how they come together. That's to say whānau, perhaps, and then hapu as a family, and then perhaps iwi as maybe New Zealand wine growers, you know, kind of thing. So really the power needs to start down here as a group of all the, how many are we up to now? 100 people sitting in here listening, going, okay, how do we self-identify? How do we, what brings us together? What's the gel that holds us together? It's going to give us much more power as a culture, or at least as a movement, if you like, going forward. Does that sound right? Did I just start ranting then?
No, it's good.
But
when you're applying it, absolutely, that's what it is. And you know, you move away from a transactional relationship into a relational relationship. And Māori are really good at shared leadership. It's kind of intrinsic in us. So.
Right.
I was going to ask Tim. You know, I love that notion, and I think Nicole and Tim, you're both talking about a very similar idea about fitting people to land, and also with tutoring a Waiwai, how that place informs you. It feels though it also requires listening and knowledge. And what's from studying cultures from around the place, Tim? What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I'm a trained scientist, so I look at the world through a scientific lens, and yet I work with people who have a very different worldview. So, you know, the elders that taught me in Papua New Guinean villages don't see the world the same way. They see the same things, but they interpret them through a different lens. So, I suppose if I can give you my view first, perhaps of how it all works. You know, I think that, you know, the natural world and our relationships with it are really like, you know, Einstein's theory of general relativity. And there's a sort of space-time continuum, you know, and that matter informs the shape of space, and the shape of space tells matter where to go. And you know, if you think about us as living entities in an ecosystem, we all have our impression on that ecosystem, and we all affect every other element in that ecosystem. You know, and we can become monstrously large in terms of our impact and cause extinctions, which are a bit like a black hole, aren't they? There's no way back from that, you know. And if you become very, very large in that ecosystem, you can actually shrink the space available to the entire ecosystem by causing extinctions. So one way of thinking about that and envisaging it is, imagine a diverse New Guinean rainforest, you know, beautiful, full of life, one of the most diverse places on the planet, full of richness for every species to make a living in. And yet, if you as a single species, and we can do this, we can cut down that whole forest. If you cut down that forest, you can convert it to a grassland that supports virtually nothing. Yeah. And so you think about the way one species becomes so monstrously large, we can be a black hole that sucks everything in, including the space itself, the eco space itself. And so when I think about, you know, wine growing as an enterprise, I know very little about, so please don't ask me to have any great thoughts there. But, you know, think about planting a vineyard in an ecological space. You can have a monstrously large impact. You could use pesticides and herbicides and whatever, and create a fertile vineyard that's producing your crop, but which has shrunk the total eco space around it by just taking too much, you know. And I think, to me, as a scientist, it's this, you know, the whole of ecological sustainability is premised around the idea that we can grow the whole eco space at the same time we prosper. But that takes deep knowledge, and also it takes a view of the land that isn't entirely legalistic. I mean, what if you pushed your rights as a landowner to the limits that the law would allow, you could destroy the ecosystem, I suspect, in most parts of Australia, and probably New Zealand. It's much more about belief. And can I give you one small example from where I worked in New Guinea with a tribe that I got to know very, very well and spoke some of their language and understood their culture? They're called the Telefol people of central New Guinea. It's the only area in New Guinea where this gigantic egg-laying mammal called the long-beaked echidna remains common. And your long-beaked echidnas live for 70 years. They breed very slowly. They're full of fat. They're a metre long. They're the kind of, you know, for food, they are absolutely up there, right? But no Telefol will ever harm as much as a single hair on an echidna, because as part of their creation myth, they are told that the echidna is their brother, that the great ancestral mother, Afek, had 4 children, and one of those children was the human, one was the echidna. The echidna had very weak eyes, and these long-beaked echidnas have tiny little eyes. And the story is that the child's eyes were so weak that the mother said, "You go and live in the high forest where the air is pure. Don't stick around here where the smoke keeps on irritating your eyes near the campfire. And I'll tell my children never to harm you." And that is the rule. So, and these people, you'll see hunters who will go and, you know, be happy to catch a rat for dinner to feed their kids who are malnourished, will walk past an echidna without harming it, simply because to do so is unthinkable. It would bring destruction upon everyone, a kind of moral corruption upon everyone that would destroy a society. And of course, a forest with echidnas is a rich forest. It's a forest with lots of bioturbation. The soil's always being turned over. The various invertebrate faunas the echidna live off are all being regulated by the presence of this great organism, this great beast. And the culture is enriched by the fact it has this marvelous large mammal, you know, easily observable. So, and that comes about not through a legislative law, but through a belief. And I do think that the way we live in the West is far too predicated upon a highly legalistic system rather than a system which is where we have beliefs and values that are the yardsticks we live by. Of course, in some areas of our life we do have them, but not so much in terms of ecology. So I'll stop there. I've been rambling on probably too long.
No, thank you, Tim. Nicole, belief versus law. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean,
Or understanding versus box ticking.
Oh, well, that one. Understanding the box ticking exercise, you know, I work in the space of education, and we facilitate for teachers to help them on their cultural practice and develop that professional cultural journey and what that looks like. And quite often we've done it to about over 5,000 of the teachers in the Canterbury region. And they come there thinking that that's enough to do, that they're ticking a certain box because it's telling them, for instance, that tātai ako, which is what they're based upon as teachers for their registration, is that this is enough to do that. But again, it's the attitude of it. So the attitude is, oh yeah, I've got to do this because I want to do this for this. And the attitude might even be a little bit more expanded than that and go, but I really want to be able to do this for these kids that are coming through. And then the understanding is that, well, I've understood that I've done that, but then the understanding to be able to put it into practice is where they miss that, because they're seeing it as just something they've got to achieve, and that's a very there's a very colonized way of it being that, well, if I do this, it's ticked, and they might go, well, I'm comfortable with just being moderate at that. Well, unfortunately for us, the generations that are coming through deserve more than moderate, and you know, they actually deserve someone who's excelling in that space, because it's been something that's been lost for quite a long time. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but in my mother and her generation, she was whipped at school for speaking her language, her native tongue. So you had a whole generation, my mother's generation, who were, you know, who were punished for speaking a language that was their language. And so that whole generation had a loss of language. So, you know, my expectation is, as a generation who has had to go and learn my language, luckily my children have picked that up, but I've had to go and learn my language, and I'm not a proficient speaker. To be still thinking that there's an element of tick box versus understanding, it shouldn't be at that shouldn't be happening anymore. We've progressed far beyond that, and we're actually preparing ourselves now for a generation where this is normalized. And by 2038 anyway, almost 25% of the population will be Māori, which means we need people who are actually able, not just being able to tick a box and have a limited understanding, but are actually able to deliver on what's needed. Yeah.
If you see, sorry, Aaron, just a second. If you sort of further on that, if you see this being, you know, going into the treaty just really quickly, because we could spend a whole session on this, but I think, you know, in the spirit of partnership, what do you, how can wine growers, you know, like, how can we help? I mean, is it like, it being just simply, applying ourselves to the treaty and understanding that, or is there other, is it going beyond that? Is it like living the values of the treaty and of our partners?
Well, history connects us, and clearly I'm not just Māori. I'm also, my father's European and my grandmother is from Boston, Massachusetts, but she's also English. It's about having meaningful conversations and wanting to create genuine partnership. It's about having the conversation at the beginning, not having it with us when you're already halfway through. It's about making sure that we're sitting at the table with a voice across everything, not just that particular thing that you need, so that we're sitting there around a table with not a real voice, but with a voice that is for that tick box, that it's okay. And so that when you go away and you do something and you have your conversation with whoever it is to get your funding, or you need money for this, or you need something over the line, such as a consent of some sort, that it's not that you can go, oh, well, we consulted with mana whenua, or we had a discussion with the Māori of the area, and what you really meant by that was, well, they came in and they sat at the table, and we did have a discussion around it, but we made the decisions. We didn't make collective decisions where it was a shared decision and everyone was asked to actually contribute. It was just that we asked them to contribute to that bit, and then that was enough for us, and we had discussion and we carried on doing it. It's about being there from the beginning and making that meaningful.
Maybe starting at a sort of like exactly that, a hapu level or individual level, like person to person, like rather than just going straight in at the top, actually creating relationships over time.
And being there at the establishment phase of anything, not at when you've already predetermined where you're going, at that establishment phase, and not being scared of it either. Because I think sometimes it's not the fact that you don't want to, it's that you're in it's almost like taking an intrepid journey, because you're not quite sure what you're going to get. And it's being fearful, or being intimate, not even fearful, but having the courage to go, oh, well, at least I'm going to learn from this when I do this, and I'm going to come out with some really great things from this, as opposed to going, this is going to be too difficult, I just don't want to do this, because actually it requires you to.
And fear's a privilege as well, but reconciliation can be clumsy and scary and even painful for many. So it's like, don't go in ready for a hug or anything like that. Just take it easy, be sincere, be real, just one-on-one to start with. Start at the beginning. Does that sound about right?
Totally. And that requires us on the other side to be really mindful of that as well, and to have mana enhancing conversations with you, not to make you feel like you know less than as well. So on the other side of that as well, you want people that are understanding, are going to help and nurture and support that, as opposed to come at you being confrontational and saying, well, you should know that and you don't know that, and you want the relationship to start off in a really good way, and one where we build trust, and we're going to get the best out of it together.
Perfect.
And I think I was just going to say, the key thing for me out of that, Nicole, is, and sort of tying a little bit into what Tim was saying, about belief being stronger than law, and listening, learning from cultures that have been here longer. And I think there's a, if I look at Māori, there's obviously so much to learn, but there's so many of us that would probably, as you said earlier, fear of getting things wrong, mispronouncing things, fear of appropriation. And my takeout, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically just lean into it, start building connections, and listening, and seeing what you can learn on that journey. Would that be fair?
Absolutely, because it's not going away. It's only going to become more and more part of what you're doing, more and more and more, and you're going to find that you're going to be crossing these paths all of the time. So get comfortable with it, and really embrace it. And if you don't know what you're doing, well, you would have gone through the same thing when you were trying to create your New Zealand Burgundy. So there would have been some things that you learnt there, and this will be exactly the same. It's no different. It's just that it's in your own backyard. And some of it is because there'll be a level, for some people, there'll be a level of guilt for not knowing enough of their own history in their own country. And, you know, and that's about that journey of self-discovery and learning of self, to be able to feel really comfortable in it.
I'd like to really get back into that, so that self-discovery and understanding our own narratives. But firstly, just Tim, what, you know, we read those of us that have been reading you for a while, you know, there was so much hope in what we were reading, and also vindication of not being completely crazy in some of your earlier writings. But a couple of years ago, it came out that you sort of felt like a lifetime of activism was, you know, it seemed like a colossal failure. Where are you now?
Look, I suppose we all have ups and downs, Nick, and it's probably good to not speak too much when you're having your downs, eh? But I did feel back in 2019 when we had Trump in the White House and we had, you know, a conservative government, possibly in New Zealand, but certainly in Australia at that point, and very little action on climate change at what was a critical time. I was really worried and really quite depressed, actually, because I could see year on year the problem was getting worse and we're doing nothing. I think that's really turned around in the last couple of years. You see it everywhere. It's not just with the Biden administration, but it's with business itself. I mean, people are now realizing things have to change. Even the fossil fuel industry is realizing that things have to change. So I'm feeling like we're back in the race. We're not winning it yet, but we're back in the race. And so, you know, that's the time you give your all, isn't it, to try to get a good outcome. And so I'll be off to Glasgow, you know, at the end of the year, just doing what I can to make sure that we get a good outcome. I think it's interesting where everything is in flux, isn't it, Nick? I mean, our climate's in flux. You're probably seeing that in New Zealand, but certainly in Australia, we're seeing it to a greater extent. You in the wine industry are at the sort of pointy end of that, because I don't think anyone notices the climate looks at the climate with such detail as a wine grower. You need to know what's happening with your climates and soils to get a good outcome. You know, at the same time, our society's in flux. You know, we're doing this dance, which will eventually lead to something new between Maori and Pākehā in New Zealand. You know, in Australia, we're doing the same sort of thing. I find it an incredibly exciting time, I must say, and that's why I wanted to engage with you, with the bunch, over this, because so much is in flux, and we're at the beginning of a journey where we've been through a really rough time, but we're at the beginning of a journey of opportunity that I think it's unparalleled, and it will lead to something very new in both Australia and New Zealand. If
we had time, I mean, at the bunch, at the event, the whole bunch event, we were going to talk about, get you to talk about Gaia and Wallace's aerial ocean and interconnectedness, all of that. But I guess just segueing from what you just, and I think that and how that relates into, once again, Papatūānuku and the interconnectedness between science and Indigenous knowledge. There's so much to unpack in there that I'd love to go for. But at this stage, eating, and, you know, Wendell Berry, eating is an agricultural act. I see that as drinking wine as an agricultural act. You've talked about a little bit about how you see at least farmers or wine growers being at the pointy end of this. Do you think it's far off that the consumer might probably understand that idea that their purchase decision has an impact on a piece of land somewhere? And do you think that should be consumer-led, or do you think that's more government or more producer?
Look, I've got to speak a bit frankly here about the nature of alcohol, Nick. You know, I mean, you know, there was a time when alcohol was mother's ruin. It was the kind of balm that the masses would use to, you know, to get through a hard day. And I lived through that time. I mean, it was far too much alcohol was drunk in my family for the family's good over time, you know. But alcohol is also evolving. It's becoming it's hard for me to put. It's becoming a kind of a foundation stone of our culture in a way. And this is not just the stuff the quaffing sort of stuff, but this is the kind of wine that you might buy to celebrate an important cultural event, you know, a wedding, a family reunion or something, where you'll go that extra yard and buy some wine that has been grown with attention to detail that makes it superior, but also one hopes with an attention to the land the wine is grown in. And you know, I have a sense when I buy a European wine, for example, and spend far more money than I should on it, you know, that you're buying cultural expertise and sustainability and a sense of place that wine comes out of, that is very, very important in terms of reaffirming my culture and where I want to be. I don't know whether that's making sense, Nick. I'm trying to pull this together as I speak, but it's so we've gone from the bulk commodity, at least for some wines, to this expression of place, community, society, you know. And I think that's really important and really hopeful. And I can see wine as a whole going in that direction, you know. And as we do so, that opens up the possibility, doesn't it, of creating something really special in New Zealand. I mean, you guys have a completely unique ecosystem. You have, you know, obviously regions which are highly favourable for growing wine, and you're a part of a society that values people and good culture, as I think I could say, in a way that it's a luxury that a lot of people don't have, you know. Yeah. So I out of that nexus will come something extremely interesting, Nick. And you know, one of the reasons I wanted to be part of this is I've got a feeling I'll be speaking to some of the people who've planted the first varietal of a particular grape in New Zealand. They are the founding fathers of this great journey, this great voyage that we'll all be going on. And I think I want to know more about their perspective. I want to see through their eyes how this act of planting a vineyard in this Antipodean place might result in a greater level of sustainability, a greater level of family sustainability, cultural sustainability, the whole thing. You know,
definitely, you've just got me. But you got me. You definitely got me on the family part in terms of like succession is the most important thing, really, in this in wine, with grapes being you know, outliving humans and land outliving even the vines, you know, and just trying to make a viable alternative or a viable life path for the next people is something that this generation we absolutely have to get right. We've only just been doing it for such a little amount of time, and you can't get an olfactory memory. Someone's learning through their taste and flavors and unplug it and stick it into another generation. It has to be lived and loved and understood. This is Māori, you know, whakapapa in terms of its in terms of their version of history. It's like something that's been handed down and actually gone on, rather than just something that you can learn in a university. But just going back to the idea of tonic, you know, the wine used to be sort of like a tonic. It was almost, you know, I had friends in France that never drunk wine. It was something that they brought into their body, and it became more and more about self-actualization. And it was back then with the aristocracy and what have you, and it was even in a religious thing as well. But self-actualization, it's what you did to self-affirm your, you know, it's not the luxury, but it said you've got somewhere, you've done something. And you know, Pinot Noir sits within that. It's expensive, it's celebratory, it's something that you do on a special occasion. But there's an element that I think that we need to capture here that is actually still just that tonic, just that something that, you know, don't drink a lot of it. Just make sure it's good. Make sure it's from New Zealand as well, hopefully. But just, you know, make sure it's good.
I've got some Aussie mates who might disagree with you there, Nick. But
yeah, no, they're our mates too.
Can I jump in there, Nick? I think the interesting thing that, just picking up on what you were saying, Tim, is the way that you're viewing your wine experience now, and the way you're thinking about it, and you are that more engaged consumer. And it feels like part of the positivity around climate change is that, especially the next generation that's coming up, they're actually thinking about what is the value of everything, and what value does luxury wine add to the market. And if it feels to me that if you don't have, and probably how I started out, if that's not deep inside your narrative, that you're adding any value to community or environment, then you're probably missing a big part of what people are engaged with.
I really think so. I think that, and it's not just wine, this is across the board for agriculture. You can see the sort of issues that factory farming is having, and unsustainable meat production, for example, and kind of broad acre farming, the sort of stuff in Europe that leads to mass pesticide use and things. People are increasingly uncomfortable with those approaches, and primary producers in Australia, at least, are focusing more and more on where the kind of sustainable solutions are, and they're being rewarded by consumers. So I think that's part of this broad trend in wine as well. But it comes back to this thing that Nick was talking about, this, the need to hand on the enterprise. I mean, how does that happen without a love of place and a real care and pride in traditions? If it's just a kind of a bald commercial enterprise, someone might decide that they can make more money in, I don't know, airports or something, maybe something different. That kind of
housing estates. It's happening here.
Yeah.
The Pinot Noir and Vitis vinifera and humans have coexisted for so long now that we love the same places. Wherever we want to build our holiday houses, our first or second or sometimes third or fourth houses seems to be on these north-facing slopes halfway up, and it's just where vines. We're already in competition with it, and we're seeing that pressure. So we definitely need to be finding a way to be able to make the viable choice for the next generation to be a pastoral entity, whether it's viticulture or not. It just has to be a pastoral endeavour or maintain its pastoral integrity.
Yeah, and I think it may be the way of expressing this, if I could just say, it's kind of we're going through a total cultural reorientation with this new generation that's coming up. It's not just about one aspect of our society, it's about everything from our interpersonal relationships and how we value them, through to deep questioning about what money and wealth actually is, deep questioning of what does it mean to be a New Zealander, what's it mean to be an Australian, and it's hugely exciting, and I think it's all part of that journey.
Awesome.
There's a couple of questions that I'll just I'm trying to paraphrase here, but one actually links into that about the I guess the tension, Kim, and maybe you've got views on this from you've seen in other industries, but there's this tension of people who dearly love the place that they've been farming for a long, long time, but are coming to these realizations that maybe the practices of their grandparents and their parents and now their practices have probably diminished or destroyed part of the value of that place. Are you seeing that people coming, is that the cultural change that you're talking about?
Look, it is very much so. I've had one line of my family were dairy farmers, on the land, and for people, for their generation, they worked like hell during the week, and the definition of a good weekend was going out and ring-barking trees or fumigating rabbit burrows or something. That was that, and it was just this constant fight with the land, and everyone seemed to be going downhill. The rate of farm suicides in Australia is frighteningly high, because of this. We create this bleak landscape around us by doing that, and a bleak way of dealing with the world. So it's funny, the farmers that seem to be succeeding now are the lazy farmers, and by lazy I mean they let ecology do some of the work for them. They're not trying to control everything. They're working in with the ecology, and for those sort of farmers, the plants that grow in the creek that slow the creek down, they're part of the solution, because the water is getting into the subsoil, and Australia's a dry country, so that counts for a lot. The birds are there they do their bit. They'll help you if you provide the food for them, and if you have a really dry year in Australia, you might as well go on holidays, because you're not going to get much production anyway. Let the land tick over for a bit. To be honest, it's a much more Aboriginal way of dealing with things. Again, can I tell you a tiny story? Tim,
I'll let you go tell that story, but just there's 100 people on out there that are listening to us and have been from the beginning. Just to let you know that please ask questions. Even if we can't get through them all, we'll record them all, and they'll be sitting in there for future conversations that we are going to have with some of our other amazing speakers that we're bringing to the bunch as well. And we'll bring all of those questions and comments forward into the event itself as well. So don't think it's wasted. It's not a passive, though there's only 4 of us having a conversation, please bring material in and questions and comments. Tim.
Yes, so the thing I want to just tell you is that in the 1960s, the US military sent a group of fitness experts out into the central desert, or the western desert, the driest and most inhospitable part of Australia, to test Aboriginal people's fitness, because they wanted to work out how soldiers could endure in very difficult circumstances. So they went out there, and what they discovered was that Aboriginal people were far worse actually at surviving without water than Europeans. They were much less fit. They couldn't run the distances the Europeans could run. And the American expert just said, oh, this is because they're kind of somehow inferior. But what it in fact reflected was the fact that Aboriginal people didn't need to go without water, even in the driest part of the driest continent on the planet. They knew how to find water and get by. They didn't need to run anywhere at fast speeds. Their food was around them. They knew how to manage the landscape to survive. And they looked at all this as a form of madness, people running around the place and dying of thirst, or, making themselves thirsty. So we've got to, and that attitude of living with the land and using your knowledge to open up the resources you need is where we need to get back to. It's not fighting the land like we did as kind of pioneers and felling the forests and all the rest. The new enterprise, I think, is finding a way of living comfortably with the land and using your knowledge to unlock the resources you happen to need at that time.
Resonate with you, Nicole?
Oh, definitely. When you're thinking about, Māori sustainable business practice, and that can be applied to any practice, the 3 fundamental ways of doing that is connection to the environment, relationships with people, and also about how that profit is perceived. And, so...
Is that shared equity? Is that the profit is perceived? Where were you going with that one?
Well, the way this new generation, the next generation coming through anyway, they're all about purpose and about connecting themselves to something larger than what they are. And so, and we've always been like that as Māori, is the way that that profit is perceived is that it's, that it's fair, it's honest, it's ethical. The way that you've done it is that it's also there for the greater good, not just for all on one particular thing. So, and it is about that intergenerational equity and that intergenerational wealth. So the way that profit is perceived is that it's dangerous in the hands of one, but it is, it is enjoyed and appreciated in the hands of many. So it's looking at it from that way, and the generation coming through are looking at these big conglomerates now and going, well, there's so much power in that, and we should be actually supporting local. We should be supporting our own, and so how you create your product leaves a footprint. And people are interested in what that footprint looks like, because that becomes your story of how you've done something. And then what you do with your profit is also part of the story. So people, I know that when I buy a bottle of wine, I'm a South Island girl, so I'm always going to buy a Central Otago Pinot. So,
sorry, Pen.
Sorry. But I like to know that comes from somewhere that I resonate with. I have a connectedness to that because I've visited that place. I know where it is, and and the bigger story of that is that whatever it is that you do, how you treat your land, I'm interested in that. I want to know that you're not wrapping and pillaging the land to be able to get a quick buck out of it and a profit, that actually you're nurturing and taking care of that, because it was there long before you were, and it will be there long after you've gone.
Awesome. Awesome points, but I'm just conscious of time. So I was just thinking maybe if we wrapped up with a few key takeaways, and feel free to jump in, but I loved, you know, there was that great point. Maybe it resonates with me more, but you know, do less, not more. But you know, but obviously, that idea of understanding your place and using knowledge, and I also love that idea that if you could lean into the knowledge that's been here for us as New Zealanders, that you know, the 1,000 years of history, and I guess leaning into that relationship to see how we can work better together. But I guess to the room, I guess key points, key takeouts of the conversation that you would, if we were to give a key points to people out there.
I like this one here. What about what? I don't want to say brand New Zealand Pinot Noir. That sounds ridiculous, but because it doesn't really exist yet. But Pinot Noir as a category, let's say New Zealand Pinot Noir as a category. What might it look like? You know, if in an ideal world, what can you see what that might look like? Is that something? Is that too crystal ball gazy, or what does it mean? What would it look like for you to go, okay, that's progress, that's hope, that's giving something, giving a future to the category. Tim.
Gee, you know, if I was looking deep into the future, what I'd imagine is that, you know, New Zealand Pinot is grown in a way that increases the eco space of New Zealand, that it gives home to more species, more diversity, more stability, more richness. That it does the same thing for New Zealand culture. It acts as a binding point and the great universal solvent in a way, perhaps, for the culture to come together, activating, mobilizing, you know, things in a uniquely New Zealand way. It obviously has to give people a living, but it also has to give them a sense of purpose and a sense of pride. You know, I think, you know, making the best, you know, is still going to be important in that, but it'll happen with working with nature, I hope. So I probably said too much because we're over time, but.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. Yeah. Nicole?
I think it goes back to the things I was just talking about before, from the point of view that, you know, Pinot Noir comes from a place, a unique place where history connects us, where we care for our environment, we care for the relationships with people, and that that the profit is with purpose, and that, you know, you take care in each step of the way in the things that you do, and it's a partnership approach. And we tell that story on a world stage. I mean, we're very lucky to have the story that we do, and that we've actually worked at it. And you just have to look back in history to see how far we've come, and that we actually take it really, really seriously. And we are a benchmark on the world stage for the way that, you know, we've created a partnership and started to understand the importance of the Indigenous people here and how we're working together to really bring that closer together. So I think we should be really proud of that, and that's the story we should be telling.
And what do you think? Maybe what can you know, our listeners do tomorrow, maybe next week, and maybe next year along that path? Who wants to go first?
Can I start with again, just a story? Sorry.
Yep.
France has given you a great gift in Pinot Noir, but France has also taken something very important. The only known specimen of the largest gecko that ever lived on the planet, which lived in New Zealand, is housed in a museum in France today. It was collected before 1800. The thing went extinct a long time ago. But the world of that gecko is essential to the sustainability of New Zealand. It's a world of vanished species, of incredible atua, incredible beauty. Yeah. The dawn chorus that gecko heard was richer than from anywhere on the planet. So maybe it's that link back to France with that gecko that can inspire people and think, how do we recreate that great New Zealand that existed at the time that gecko was around? What are the tools available to us? What are the possibilities? I'm just thinking of a French-New Zealand sort of a connection that is perhaps enriching. Anyway.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah. And I think that as much as it sounds like we in a conversation predicated on becoming ourselves and moving on from borrowing from Burgundy, we have to say, doff our hats for allowing us to have that culture and learn from all of those things. So I think there's a debt there as well. But I totally agree. You know, enrich, bring more back, not back, but just recreate. And I think that's what you've said before. You can almost reinvent. Like we're so young at this stage. Even though I remember Tim, you wrote a little bit something about New Zealand being far older than Zealand, the old Zealand back in Holland. You know, biologically or ecologically, even probably culturally to some degree. You know, trying to tap into that, looking at us as reminding ourselves that we are actually part of an older world. We're not just something that's completely new, and I guess fighting against that, because it can, in the new world moniker, can be prejudiced. It can drive prejudice, I believe, in wine. Nicole, were you?
Can you remind me what you said? You said, what is, sorry, if people go away and...
What would people do to like, what can a Kiwi wine grower that's just been tuning in here, listening to us rambling on, where does the rubber meet the road, in Aaron's words, I think it was, you know, what's the next step, do you feel?
Go away and learn about yourself. Go away and connect yourself back to your whakapapa, your heritage. Learn about who you are and connect yourself back to a land, because everybody has a culture. And Kiwis, you know, mainstream New Zealand is convinced that they don't, and sometimes I feel like people think that they don't feel comfortable claiming New Zealand as the place that they're from, even though they've been here for generations. So go away and learn about yourself, so that when you stand up in front of people, you can connect yourself back to land. You can connect yourself back to whenua, and you give yourself a tūranga waiwai. Because when you do that, you'll realise how powerful that is. And that's not a short-term thing. That takes a bit of time, and you know, and it will be a great journey for anyone who does that. So yeah, go away, learn your whakapapa, learn your history, connect yourself back to the land.
And if you find any scary stories along the way, don't bury them or forget them. You know, tell them as they were, tell them as they are. There's more than one
Own
narrative.
them.
It's not some master narrative. Own them, exactly. And
we all have history of strength and struggle. So, you know, own that. Be happy, you know, and just know that that's all of that is why you're here and the way that you are today. So yeah. It'll be the most important thing you do for yourself.
Cool.
That's a pretty amazing place to wrap, I think.
Cool. Nice one. Oh, thanks for that. Thanks for tuning in. Hey team, we are going to have the whole bunch event in February. Aaron, the date?
The 11th, 10th and the 11th of February.
And all things, you know, virus notwithstanding, and otherwise we'll have Tim and Nicole back, and we've got some other amazing speakers. Hopefully we're going to get Dayman Salmon and Mike Taitoku on a talk like this before Christmas that you can have a look at. Also understand that, yeah, we're all like geeking out on identity and stuff like that right now, and that is important, and trying to get a sense of common goals, common purpose within a Pinot Noir industry is going to be essential for us, not just to succeed, but just, I think, to survive at some stage. But the whole bunch was also meant to be aspirational. It was meant to be insightful, but the part of it was joyful. And you know, it will be fun. It's not all about this sort of stuff. It's Paul Donaldson and Nat Christensen's are part of our committee. So we're definitely going to have some fun at it as well. Stay tuned in, and yeah, go out, learn yourself, and aspire for more. What is it, Tim? More richness.
Yeah.
Beauty.
Your
Beauty.
richness and beauty.
Is it
Atua. Nice.
Atua? I think, yeah, Atua.
Atua.
And all your questions, as I said, team, will be recorded. We've recorded this, and all your questions will go forward. So thanks very much for tuning in. Have a great weekend. Get into a nice, yummy Pinot. We'll see you soon. Ciao, ciao.
Yeah, thank you.